The mist hung low over the hedgerows that morning, a damp and heavy veil clinging to the countryside surrounding Hawthorne Court. It was the sort of morning where even the crows seemed reluctant to stir, their calls muffled by the stillness. Within the stately house, the silence was broken not by the bustle of servants, but by the sharp cry of discovery. The master of the estate, Sir Reginald Hawthorne, was dead. Found sprawled across the Persian rug in his study, a place where he had retired the previous evening after a dinner party of curious tension. The scene, when examined, bore none of the expected signs of intrusion. The oak-panelled room was intact, no lock was broken, no window forced. The desk lamp still glowed faintly, its oil nearly spent, casting a pale yellow halo over the lifeless figure. His hand stretched out, as if he had been grasping for something, but what he reached toward was stranger than the body itself, a single sprig of lavender, placed deliberately upon the leather blotter. It seemed incongruous in the masculine, somber chamber, too delicate, too intentional. The butler, Harrington, swore he had never seen it before, nor could he imagine how it had come to rest there. Sir Reginald bore no visible wound, no sign of violence. The doctor, hastily summoned, suggested a seizure or sudden failure of the heart, though his furrowed brow betrayed uncertainty. A half-empty glass of brandy sat on the desk, its amber surface unstirred. The decanter was untouched, as though the master had poured his own final drink. Yet there was no shattered tumbler, no sign of a struggle, no trace of spilled liquor. Death had crept upon him quietly, but not naturally. The dinner party the night before had been small and select Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Sir Reginald's much younger wife. With her cool poise and a smile never quite reaching her eyes, Captain Lionel Stratton, a family friend and something of a hanger-on, whose debts and thinly veiled temper were well known, Dr. Ambrose Fielding, the village physician, whose opinions carried more authority than affection, and lastly, Miss Clara Denham, Lady Eleanor's companion, a quiet presence whose eyes rarely lifted from her embroidery, but who seemed to hear everything. 5 at dinner, including Sir Reginald. Now one was absent. The household whispered in uneasy tones. The butler had secured the room until proper inquiry could be made. No servant claimed to have entered or disturbed anything. They spoke of the study as inviolate, a sanctum into which Sir Reginald had shut himself nightly. The doors had been locked from within, both the heavy oak to the hall and the smaller door leading to the terrace. The French windows were secured by bolts that showed no tampering. In short, the man had been alone, inaccessible, until his body was discovered by Lady Eleanor at dawn. She claimed she had gone to fetch him, concerned he had not come to bed. The lavender sprig remained the only object out of place. Its faint scent lingered above the ink, the paper, the leather. No one admitted to having brought flowers into the study. The gardens did not boast lavender at this season, and the hothouse was said to contain only orchids and roses. Yet here was a stalk, purple and fragrant, resting where it could not be ignored. It seemed at once trivial and deeply deliberate, as though its very presence mocked the certainty of natural death. The local constabulary, summoned with all due haste, found themselves bewildered. Inspector Graves, a stout man with a brisk manner, frowned at the locked doors, tapped the French window with his knuckles, and demanded to know who had last seen Sir Reginald alive. At dinner, they all answered, though Lady Eleanor recalled that he lingered after, speaking at length with Captain Stratton by the fire before retreating to his study. Stratton confirmed it, somewhat defensively, saying their talk had been of hunting trips and estate matters, nothing more. Yet his flushed face and quick denial suggested there had been something sharper in their exchange. Graves examined the brandy. sniffing at the glass with suspicion. Yet when he touched it to his lips, he spat immediately, declaring it ordinary and untainted. The decanter, too, bore no peculiar odor. "Nothing here," he muttered, though the shadow of doubt crossed his face. Poison was suspected, but with no residue, no evidence. It was only speculation. Lady Eleanor stood pale and composed throughout, answering each question with patience but without grief. Her marriage to Sir Reginald had been spoken of as one of convenience, her beauty matched to his wealth and title. Few who knew them believed affection played much part. Her demeanor was of someone waiting for a conclusion already known to her, as though the detective's questions were no more than a formality. Miss Denham, on the other hand, kept her gaze fixed on the carpet, fingers twisting at her shawl as though the sight of her mistress's calm unnerved her. The doctor insisted that only a proper post-mortem could reveal the cause. Graves consented, though his unease grew with every passing hour. "It's the lavender that unsettles me," he confided later. "If it were natural, why place such a thing by the body? And if it were murder, how in heaven's name was it done in a locked room?" As the sun rose higher, casting light through the high windows of Hawthorne Court, the questions multiplied. The servants swore to the security of the house. The guests swore to their innocence. Yet someone had left that sprig, a symbol, a message, or a misdirection. Its meaning, hidden in the folds of the case, was the single thread to be drawn. The death of Sir Reginald Hawthorne was not simple, nor was it natural. It was an insoluble riddle, its answer locked as tightly as the doors of that room. And somewhere within the house, among the calm faces and careful words, walked the hand that had placed the lavender sprig. The arrival of Lord Peter Wimsey was not at first regarded as anything extraordinary. He had been staying with an acquaintance in the neighboring village, and, hearing of the tragedy at Hawthorne Court, motored over with a mixture of curiosity and courtesy. The butler, uncertain whether to admit him, hesitated until Inspector Graves, already flustered with questions he could not answer, recognized the advantage of another pair of eyes, especially those belonging to a man whose reputation had occasionally strayed into the columns of the Times. Lord Peter entered the study with that languid ease which made servants underestimate him and policemen distrust him. He paused in the doorway, monocle glinting in the pale light, and let his gaze drift not upon the body, which had already been removed to another chamber, but upon the room itself. His head tilted slightly, bird-like, as though listening to the silence. "A locked room, I gather," he murmured. "Always so considerate of the criminal to provide us with a puzzle box. One almost feels unworthy of such attentions." Graves gave a grunt. "Dead as a doornail, heart perhaps, though I'll not be satisfied without a proper post-mortem. But what do you make of this, lavender?" He indicated the sprig, now sealed in a small envelope. "Lavender," Wimsey echoed, lifting it delicately between finger and thumb. He inhaled, not with the blunt sniff of a constable, but with a curious appreciation. "Freshly cut, wouldn't you say? Not wilted, not from a florist, unless Hawthorne Court shops at quite unusual ones. I wonder, does Lady Hawthorne wear lavender water?" Graves shook his head. "Perfume perhaps, but not flowers. And not this." "Aish!" Wimsey replaced the envelope on the desk, but his eyes lingered on the blotter where it had rested. There, faintly, was the mark of moisture, a darkened patch where the stem had lain. He touched it gently. Still damp. "Whoever placed it here did so very recently, later than Sir Reginald's death, I'd wager." The inspector frowned. "Later. Then you think that the sprig is less a clue to how he died than to who wished us to think so?" Wimsey gave a little shrug, half whimsical. half serious. Misdirection Graves. Theatrical even. I dare say we are in for a performance. He moved about the room with a slow deliberation, pausing at the desk. The glass of brandy stood where it had been, untouched since the discovery. Wimsey bent to examine it, then glanced toward the decanter. May I? Without waiting, he poured a small measure, swirled it, and held it to the light. His nose dipped toward it, his expression one of detached curiosity. Clean, quite ordinary. Yet the glass. Ah, that's curious. He tapped it gently. See here, Inspector. A faint rim, as though someone wiped the edge with a cloth. One would hardly wipe one's own glass before drinking, unless one had an odd mania for tidiness. But to wipe it after? Why, that suggests concealment. Graves scowled. You mean poison? I mean, Wimsey said softly, that something was here which is no longer. He set the glass down carefully, eyes darting about the carpet. A moment later he stooped, plucked something small from near the skirting board, and held it up. A shred of paper torn, when burned at the edge. Somebody destroyed something in haste. Perhaps a letter. Interesting, don't you think? That our good Sir Reginald died while apparently alone, yet still felt the need to burn correspondence. Unless someone else did the burning after his demise. The inspector was beginning to look uneasy. Wimsey, seeing it, smiled faintly. Oh, don't fret, Graves. You've done all quite properly. But there are undercurrents here. Tidal rips beneath the calm surface. It was at this moment that Lady Eleanor entered, her pale face composed, her morning gown already impeccable. She acknowledged the detective with a faint inclination of the head. Lord Peter Wimsey, I believe. How good of you to come. You will forgive us if our household is somewhat disordered. Wimsey bowed slightly, studying her with those cool, searching eyes that seemed to strip away the mask of civility. On the contrary, Lady Hawthorne, the order is remarkable. Most households in grief betray it in chaos. Here, one might think the funeral had been prepared in advance. A flicker crossed her face. Gone almost before it was seen, she smiled with practiced poise. We each meet sorrow in our own fashion, my lord. And some, he murmured. With remarkable foresight. Graves cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Lady Hawthorne, we are still establishing the details. Perhaps you might tell Lord Peter what you told me earlier. She repeated her account without variation, her voice smooth, her manner steady. She had last seen her husband after dinner. She had retired earlier than usual with a headache. He had not joined her in the night. She had discovered him in the morning. Wimsey listened, head cocked slightly, but asked no questions until she finished. Then he said, And what of Captain Stratton? He and Sir Reginald spoke late, did they not? Her eyes flickered just a moment. They did. I cannot say of what. Men's matters, I believe. Wimsey bowed again. Naturally. When she had gone, Graves muttered. You suspect her. I suspect everyone, Wimsey replied cheerfully. But chiefly I suspect the little things. The lavender, for example. Did you notice Miss Denham's expression when she saw it? She looked as though the ground had slipped beneath her. The inspector frowned. The companion? She's nobody? Ah, but nobodies often notice what somebodies overlook. Wimsey smiled faintly, glancing toward the door through which Lady Eleanor had vanished. It is a curious stage we find ourselves upon, Graves with each actor in place, each line rehearsed. But somewhere the script falters. Did you see Captain Stratton this morning? His boots were wet. Graves blinked. Wet. But he's not been out. Quite. The lawns were dry. The dew had lifted by then. Yet his boots bore fresh damp earth. Garden earth. One wonders, Graves. What errand took him out between the time Sir Reginald locked his study and the moment his body was discovered? The inspector scratched his head. But the doors were locked. How could anyone have got in? That, my dear Graves, Wimsey said softly, is precisely the sort of question the murderer hopes will keep us occupied. The better to distract us from what lies in plain sight. He strolled back to the desk, pausing before the chair where Sir Reginald had sat. His fingers brushed lightly over the leather armrest, then over the rug. He crouched, studying the pile, his face intent. Here is something, faint but undeniable. See how the pile is pressed down, slightly darker. Another chair was drawn up here, recently, though it has since been returned to its place. Sir Reginald was not alone when he died. He entertained a visitor. Graves leaned closer, squinting. But then who locked the door behind them? That, Wimsey murmured, straightening with a sigh of satisfaction, is our little conundrum. And I do so adore a conundrum. Wimsey's discovery of the second chair altered the atmosphere of the house like a sudden shift in wind before a storm. The notion that Sir Reginald had not been alone, that a hidden visitor had shared those final hours, struck at the carefully rehearsed calm of Hawthorne Court. Inspector Graves, stiff and irritable, ordered that each member of the household be questioned in turn. Wimsey, leaning languidly against the mantel, appeared more an idle spectator than a participant, yet his eyes never strayed from the faces that entered the study one by one. Captain Stratton was called first. He arrived with the bluster of a man who hoped volume might disguise unease. His boots, now cleaned of the incriminating mud Wimsey had noted, shone too brightly, as though polished in haste. "Terrible business, Inspector, terrible!" I can hardly credit it. Reginald was a man of robust constitution. Played a fair game of tennis last month and never winded. He seated himself heavily, crossing his legs with a clink of spurs, and met Wimsey's gaze only briefly. "You were the last to speak with Sir Reginald," Graves said. "What was discussed?" "Estate matters, as I told you," Stratton answered too quickly. "He was concerned about the stables, the cost of repairs. Nothing of consequence." "And you left him alone here," Wimsey interjected softly. "Indeed. He dismissed me himself. Said he had correspondence to attend to." "Did he strike you as troubled?" "Agitated." Stratton hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. "No more than usual. You know Reginald, stern, perhaps, but not excitable." He forced a laugh, the sound hollow in the quiet room. Wimsey tilted his head, monocle glittering. "And yet he drew up a chair for you, did he not? There are marks in the rug where one stood beside this desk." The captain stiffened. "If there was a chair, I cannot say. I sat, naturally. He gestured me to it. Nothing suspicious in that." "No," Wimsey said, his tone light. "Unless, of course one forgets to mention it." A flush rose on Stratton's cheeks. He half rose, then thought better of it. "If you mean to imply anything, I'll thank you to be plain." "On the contrary," Wimsey replied, "I mean only that memory is a treacherous servant. One forgets details when one is eager to be helpful." Stratton left in a clatter of impatience, and Miss Clara Denham was brought next. She slipped into the room like a shadow, her hands clasped tightly, eyes downcast. When Graves addressed her, she answered with barely more than a murmur. "You attended Lady Hawthorne after dinner?" "Yes, sir. Her ladyship had a headache. I fetched her shawl, and later some salts." "You saw nothing of Sir Reginald after?" "No, sir. I retired early." Her voice trembled, betraying nerves. Wimsey watched her closely. "Miss Denham, when you saw the lavender upon the desk this morning, you seemed distressed. Why was that?" Her eyes flicked up, startled. Oh no, my lord, not distressed, only surprised. It was so strange. You recognized it, perhaps? No, no, sir. Only that lavender is uncommon here. I do not know where it came from. Her fingers twisted at her shawl with desperate insistence, and she glanced toward the door as though seeking escape. You are fond of embroidery, are you not? Whimsy continued gently. Lavender sprigs appear often in needlework. Curious coincidence, don't you think? Her lips parted, but no words emerged. Graves, sensing her agitation, dismissed her with a grunt. She fled, her footsteps swift across the tiles. Lady Eleanor entered afterward, composed and graceful as before. She lowered herself into the chair with the serenity of one attending a social call rather than an inquiry. If I can be of further service, gentlemen, your husband entertained Captain Stratton here after dinner. Graves began. Did you hear any of their conversation? Not a word. I had retired. Though I could not sleep for some time, I did not leave my room. When at last I went to find him in the morning, well, you know what I discovered. Did Sir Reginald have enemies? Whimsy asked. She smiled faintly, lips curving without warmth. My husband was a man of firm principles. Principles, as you know, often make enemies. But none, I think, who would stoop to murder. And the lavender. For the briefest instant, something tightened at the corners of her mouth. A mystery to me, as to you. I have no taste for it, though I do wear scent. Sir Reginald was not a man for flowers. Whimsy's gaze lingered on her face, studying the stillness of her eyes. No, and yet someone wished us to see it. Such delicate cruelty, almost as though it mocked the absence of mourning. Her hand moved to her pearls, fingers curling around them as though they offered strength. You speak in riddles, Lord Peter. If you seek guilt in me, you waste your time. When she left, the silence deepened. Graves rubbed at his temples. They all tell different stories, or half-stories. And none admit to knowing about the lavender. Whimsy murmured, but half-stories are the best kind. They conceal more than lies. Did you note, Graves, how Lady Eleanor grew cold when lavender was mentioned, while Miss Denham all but trembled? And our dear captain, he forgot a chair, which is not easily forgotten. Each conceals something, but what? Dr. Fielding was summoned last. He bustled in with professional assurance, spectacles glinting, his hands folded behind his back. Well, gentlemen, the post-mortem is underway. I can tell you there is no mark of violence, no blow, no wound. Heart failure remains possible, though I cannot rule out subtle poisons until further tests are complete. Poison, Graves muttered darkly. Whimsy asked, You are well acquainted with the family, Doctor. Intimately. I have attended Sir Reginald for 20 years. A strong man, though lately under strain. What strain? Fielding hesitated. Domestic unease, perhaps. I should not speak out of turn. On the contrary. Doctor, Whimsy said, turns of speech often prove most illuminating. The physician cleared his throat. Sir Reginald was a proud man, jealous of his authority. His marriage, well, let us say it lacked harmony. He was not blind to Lady Eleanor's friendships. He spoke once to me of Captain Stratton in terms less than charitable. Yet he never confided further. Whimsy smiled faintly. Then perhaps he wrote what he did not speak. A pity that letter went into the fire. Fielding blinked. Letter? But Whimsy only bowed, allowing the doctor to depart. When the questioning ended, the study seemed to hold the echoes of all those voices, each one weaving a pattern of truth and falsehood, each concealing some part of the whole. Graves sat heavily, muttering of contradictions, while Whimsy strolled once more about the room. They deceive, Graves, he said softly, but they deceive in different keys. Stratton is too eager, Lady Eleanor too composed, Miss Denham too frightened. And the doctor, the doctor knows more than he pretends. Somewhere among these notes of dissonance lies the melody of murder. Graves groaned. And until we have proof, we've nothing but riddles. True, Wimsey said lightly, yet his eyes gleamed. But riddles, my dear Graves, are where truth most loves to hide. The house seemed to breathe uneasily after the questioning, as though its ancient timbers absorbed the contradictions and whispered them back in muffled echoes. Inspector Graves stalked the corridors with the grim impatience of a man seeking solid ground, while Wimsey, with his languid manner, appeared content to drift upon the currents of uncertainty. Yet beneath his drawl and whimsical asides, his mind worked with tireless precision, setting each statement beside another, testing the fit of words as though arranging pieces of a vast and stubborn puzzle. Motives, he murmured late that evening as he and Graves sat in the library with brandy untouched. Every player in this little drama carries one like a concealed weapon. The difficulty is not the absence of motives, but the abundance of them. A veritable orchard of temptation. Graves grunted. Captain Stratton. Money. He's drowning in debts, the whole county knows it. If Sir Reginald cut him off, that's reason enough. Indeed, Wimsey said, and Lady Eleanor, inheritance. A widow of wealth and freedom, instead of a wife chained to an aging husband. Add a touch of jealousy perhaps, her name and Stratton's often paired in whispers. Then our timid Miss Denham, fear, perhaps, or loyalty misplaced. She is bound to Lady Eleanor, yet looks as though the very sight of lavender unstrung her. She knows something she dare not say. And the doctor, Wimsey smiled faintly, the good physician, reputation, perhaps. He was Sir Reginald's confidant, and confidences can be dangerous things. A man of science who fears scandal might prefer silence. Yes, Graves. They are all bound to Sir Reginald in threads of need and resentment. The trick is to see which thread tightened into a noose. The inspector muttered into his moustache. But how? None of them could get in. Locked room? Remember, locked rooms are like conjuring tricks, Wimsey replied. They exist not to be believed but to be explained. Let us not be distracted. We must first know why before we can guess how. He rose, restless, and drifted to the shelves where rows of dusty volumes lined the walls. His fingers brushed the spines absently, his eyes half closed. Consider Stratton needs money, Eleanor freedom, Denham silence, Fielding respect. Each motive alone is plausible, yet none alone explains the lavender, the wiped glass, the burned letter. They are like mismatched socks, useful singly, but absurd together. The following morning, Wimsey contrived to encounter each suspect in turn, not with the blunt force of interrogation, but with the delicate probing of a conversational scalpel. Captain Stratton was found in the stables, currying a horse with unnecessary vigor. Fine animal, Wimsey remarked, leaning casually against the stall. A pity, though, about the debts. Expensive things, horses. Stratton's jaw tightened. I manage well enough. Oh, quite. Though Sir Reginald was not known for indulgence. One imagines he kept a tight hand on the purse. A glare, quick and dangerous, shot from the captain's eyes before he mastered himself. He was a just man. Justice, Wimsey said lightly, is a cold comfort to creditors. He left the remark hanging, and when he turned to go, he caught the captain staring after him, lips pressed into a hard line. Lady Eleanor received him in the morning room. Her black gown a picture of decorum against the pale light streaming through the tall windows. Wimsey bowed, all charm, and admired her composure. You carry your grief with admirable grace, Lady Hawthorne. She inclined her head. One must. Appearances matter? Indeed. Appearances are everything. Even marriages, perhaps. Her eyes narrowed, though her smile held. You are very frank. Lord Peter, frankness is such an English virtue, he said cheerfully. Though sometimes costly. Tell me, did your husband ever speak of altering his will? For the first time, she faltered. Her hands stilled upon the embroidery frame before her. Why should he? The estate naturally passes to me. Then you are secure. Whimsy's tone was almost wistful. Security is a rare treasure. Yet how fragile when threatened by suspicion. Imagine, for example, if Sir Reginald had indeed suspected his wife of companionship with another. Imagine the threat of disinheritance. Her eyes flashed, but she said nothing. The silence itself was answer enough. With Miss Denham, Whimsy softened his approach. He found her in the garden, her shawl drawn tightly about her, though the air was mild. She startled when he greeted her, like a bird on the wing. You are fond of the outdoors, Miss Denham. Yes, my lord, she whispered. Lavender grows in many gardens. But not here, I am told. Her hands trembled. No, sir, not here. And yet you knew it at once when you saw it. She bit her lip, eyes filling with unshed tears. Why, please, I cannot. Whimsy touched her arm lightly, his voice kind. Fear is a cruel jailer, Miss Denham. But truth, however painful, is always lighter to carry. When you are ready, you will speak. He left her trembling, but with the sense that her silence was a crack waiting to widen. Fielding was last. Whimsy visited his surgery in the village, cluttered with bottles and instruments. The doctor adjusted his spectacles nervously as Whimsy seated himself. You were Sir Reginald's physician for years. You must have known his weaknesses, of course. But he was not a man to fall suddenly. Unless, Fielding trailed off, then coughed. Unless, he shook his head. It is speculation. There are poisons difficult to trace. But I cannot say without certainty. Yet you were quick to suggest heart failure, doctor. A prudent shield, perhaps, for your own uncertainty? Fielding flushed. I did what was proper. A doctor must not inflame gossip. Quite so. Whimsy agreed lightly. And yet gossip inflames itself, with or without us. He rose, leaving the doctor staring after him with the look of a man who feared his secrets might be glimpsed through his coat. By evening, Whimsy had assembled a tangle of motives as dense as the hedgerows around the estate. Stratton's desperation, Eleanor's impatience, Denham's fear, Fielding's concealment, all pointed toward guilt, yet each contradicted the other. If Stratton killed for money, why the lavender? If Eleanor killed for freedom, why the burned letter? If Denham trembled at knowledge, what had she seen? And if Fielding covered truth, whom was he protecting? He returned to the study, pacing before the desk where the lavender had lain. A maze, Graves, he murmured, perfect maze. Every path leads to a wall. Yet one must lead to the center. We must look not at the motives separately, but at their intersections. Who benefits from silence? Who from suspicion? Who gains when another is accused? Graves muttered, You talk in riddles again. Riddles, yes, Whimsy said softly. But remember, the answer to a riddle is always the one thing overlooked. The following day dawned with a brittle brightness, the kind of sharp autumn light that made the house seem too stark, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. A servant, dusting in the gallery, discovered something that electrified Inspector Graves and set the household astir. Beneath a chair cushion lay a folded handkerchief, faintly scented with lavender. The cloth bore initials embroidered in fine, feminine stitching, E.H., Lady Eleanor Hawthorne's monogram. Graves pounced upon it as though Providence had dropped the evidence into his hands.
There we have it!
lavender upon the desk, lavender upon her handkerchief. No man could ask for plainer proof. She placed the sprig to mark her deed. Pride, perhaps, or sheer disdain for discovery. The inspector wasted no time. Lady Eleanor was summoned to the study, where she entered with her usual composure, though a faint line of colour touched her cheeks when the handkerchief was displayed. "It is mine," she admitted without hesitation. "I have several such. Lavender sachets are used in the drawers of my bureau." "This is no mystery," Graves snorted. "And how came it to be under the chair cushion, madame? Do you sit in the gallery and drop your belongings at random?" Her gaze flicked toward the cushion, as though she had not known of its hiding place. "I cannot account for it. Perhaps it was misplaced by a servant. Perhaps placed there by another hand." The inspector's eyes gleamed. "Too convenient by half. Sir Reginald dyes lavender upon his desk, and your handkerchief, scented with lavender, concealed within your own house. The jury will think little of coincidence." Through it all, Wimsey leaned against the mantel with an air of absent-minded detachment, his monocle catching the light. When Graves finished his declaration, he drawled, "So neat, Graves, so devastatingly neat. It would warm the heart of any prosecuting counsel. But neatness, you know, is the hallmark of embroidery, not necessarily of truth." Lady Eleanor's chin lifted sharply. "You mean to defend me, Lord Peter?" "I mean only," he replied, "that when evidence presents itself too perfectly, one must examine whether it was presented at all, or arranged." Graves bristled. "Always contrariness with you, Wimsey. The facts are plain." "Facts," Wimsey said softly. "They are such obliging creatures, willing to sit up and beg for whoever feeds them. But truth is a more feral beast. It does not come so easily to heel." Despite his reservations, Graves pressed on with the arrest. Servants whispered as Lady Eleanor, pale but unflinching, was escorted to her rooms under watch. Captain Stratton muttered about justice, Dr. Fielding shook his head gravely, and Miss Denham wept silently in the corridor, wringing her hands. The house, once restless with suspicion, now simmered with certainty, or at least with the comfort of believing the matter near its end. Yet Wimsey did not share their relief. That evening he walked alone through the long corridors, pausing before portraits and windows, his expression one of thoughtful dissatisfaction. The handkerchief troubled him. Too obvious, too clumsy. Lady Eleanor, whatever her faults, was not a fool. If she had wished to kill her husband, she would not have chosen so theatrical a token as lavender, nor left her own monogrammed handkerchief behind. No, it smacked of arrangement, as though someone had woven her guilt in advance, laying clues like snares in a rabbit warren. He returned once more to the study, now deserted save for the lingering scent of extinguished lamps. He sat in Sir Reginald's chair, staring at the empty blotter, the scorched remnants of the letter still in his pocket, the lavender sprig, the wiped glass, the missing correspondence. None of these pointed squarely to Lady Eleanor, and yet the household, eager for resolution, seized upon the handkerchief as a banner of certainty. Wimsey tapped the desk lightly with his fingertips. If one wished to incriminate her, what better way? A sprig of lavender, a scented handkerchief, a suggestion of jealousy. It is almost too artistic, too literary. A murder staged like a novel. A soft sound drew his attention. Miss Denham lingered in the doorway, hesitant, her shawl clutched tightly. "My lord," she whispered, "is it true? Will they take her away?" "For the moment, yes," Wimsey said gently. "But tell me, Miss Denham, what troubles you? You look as though you carry a stone upon your heart." Her lips trembled. "It isn't right. Her ladyship, she may be proud, but she is not wicked. I cannot believe it." You know something? Whimsy murmured, studying her. Something you fear to speak. Tears welled in her eyes. I saw the captain in the garden that night, near the hothouse. I thought nothing of it then, but, she broke off, glancing fearfully around. The hothouse, Whimsy repeated softly. Where there is no lavender, only orchids and roses. And yet damp earth clung to his boots. Yes, that fits. Thank you, Miss Denham. You have been most brave. But even with this whisper of truth, he knew the battle would not be easily won. Graves, satisfied with his prisoner, would not relinquish her without more. The household, relieved of uncertainty, would cling to their chosen culprit. And all the while, somewhere within these walls, the true hand moved unseen, content to let Lady Eleanor bear the blame. That night, as the lamps were extinguished and the corridors fell into uneasy silence, Whimsy sat wakeful in his chamber, cigarette smoke curling into the shadows. He felt the case slipping into a false conclusion. Like a play in which the wrong actor took the bow while the real protagonist waited in the wings. The stage was set, the audience convinced. Yet the drama was far from over. The murderer is still among us, he murmured to the darkness. And having played their first act so cleverly, they will not stop here. They wait for the second cue. And somewhere beyond the door, perhaps listening even now, the real criminal smiled in the shadows. Whimsy's unease deepened as the hours lengthened. The handkerchief remained too pat, too readily discovered, and Miss Denham's timid revelation about Stratton in the garden gnawed at his mind. The threads refused to weave a simple pattern. Somewhere in the background, beyond lavender sprigs and locked doors, lay an older story, something the present crime had awakened rather than created. He sensed it like a faint echo behind every word spoken in Hawthorne Court. The following morning he took himself to the library once more. Not for Sir Reginald's books but for his papers. Harrington, the butler, stood stiffly by while Whimsy rifled through locked drawers. With Graves's reluctant consent. The ledgers were meticulous, estate accounts, tenant rents, farm yields, all proper and orderly. But tucked into a leather folio, yellowed with age, Whimsy found a series of letters tied with faded ribbon. Their dates stretched back 20 years. He read swiftly, lips tightening. They were exchanges between Sir Reginald and a solicitor in London concerning a certain James Stratton, father of the present captain. The elder Stratton had been overseer of the estate's lands, dismissed in disgrace after funds went missing. Though no charges had been pressed, the implication of theft hung heavy in the letters, and Reginald had vowed never again to employ a Stratton in any capacity of trust. Whimsy sat back, fingers steepled. Here was no coincidence. The family disgrace, the stain upon the Stratton name. Could it explain the younger man's desperation, his bitterness, and more, could Sir Reginald have been on the verge of revealing this past scandal? If so, Captain Lionel Stratton had more to fear than unpaid debts. His very honour, already precarious, might be ruined beyond recovery. Graves, when told, harumphed. Explains motive, certainly. But we had that already. Debts, dishonour, scandal, strong enough reasons to strike. Still doesn't put him in a locked study. Patience, Graves, Whimsy murmured. We must consider what Sir Reginald intended with these papers. Why preserve them all these years unless he meant to use them? Perhaps he had planned a reckoning, and someone learned of it. At luncheon, Whimsy watched Stratton with new eyes. The captain spoke loudly, laughed too heartily. Yet his gaze flicked constantly toward Eleanor's absence. She still confined upstairs, guarded under suspicion. Stratton's relief at her plight seemed almost palpable. To see her accused meant his own scrutiny lessened. But his hand shook when he raised his glass. The sins of the father still weighed on him, it seemed, heavier than coin. Later, while strolling the grounds with Harrington, Wimsey inquired casually about the house's history. The butler, gratified to share his knowledge, spoke of Sir Reginald's father, of expansions to the west wing, of family traditions. But when Wimsey asked about Lady Eleanor's people, Harrington hesitated. She was Miss Hargrave, my lord, from Yorkshire. Married Sir Reginald 5 years ago. Some say not for love, but I could not tell you more. And her companion, Miss Denham. Harrington frowned. She came with her ladyship, a distant relation I believe. Quiet soul. Keeps to herself, a relation. You say? So I heard, my lord. The seed of an idea stirred. If Denham were kin to Eleanor, her loyalty became clearer, as did her fear. Perhaps she knew of matters older still, family affairs buried beneath respectability. Wimsey resolved to test the thought. That evening, he found Miss Denham alone in the withdrawing room, her embroidery abandoned on the sofa. He sat beside her, his manner easy. Your ladyship trusts you greatly. She has been kind to me, Denham whispered. You are her kin, are you not? Her eyes widened, fear flashing like a candle guttering. Who told you? No one. But truth leaves its footprints, Miss Denham. Come, what binds you so closely to Lady Eleanor? What is it you dare not speak? She twisted her hands. It is not my secret. Years ago, before she married Sir Reginald, there was a scandal. Not her fault, not wholly. But Sir Reginald discovered it. He threatened once to expose her, to ruin her family. She married him instead to keep it buried. Aye, Wimsey breathed, so the past throws its shadow long. And did Captain Stratton know of this? I cannot say. But I think, she stopped, terror sealing her lips. Wimsey pressed no further. But the revelation deepened the maze. Sir Reginald had bound both Stratton and Eleanor with past disgrace. Each had reason to fear his pen, his voice, his unforgiving will. And in his study, on that final night, he had burned a letter, perhaps the beginning of disclosure. Who had most to lose if that letter survived? The answer was not one alone, but two. Back in his chamber, Wimsey laid the pieces out like cards. Sir Reginald held secrets of dishonor, Stratton's inherited shame, Eleanor's concealed scandal. Both stood to gain from his death, both ensnared by the past. But one had gone further, weaving lavender and handkerchiefs to frame the other. He recalled the faint damp earth on Stratton's boots, the smell of the hothouse. Roses, orchids, but no lavender, unless lavender had been cultivated secretly, perhaps for medicinal use or as experiment. If so, Stratton's midnight errand might have been to fetch the sprig, laying the symbol that would tie guilt to Eleanor. Still, one detail nagged, the burned letter. Why had the murderer destroyed it instead of leaving it? Unless it named them both. Unless its very survival would have condemned more than one. The crime, Wimsey saw now, was not a simple act of passion or greed, but the flowering of old shadows. The murder was rooted in histories long buried, shames long concealed, all converging on a single man whose death promised release. The present was only the harvest, the seed had been sown decades ago. Yet though he traced the roots, he had not yet uncovered the hand that pulled the weed. Somewhere in the interplay of dishonor and fear lay the answer. Lady Eleanor languished under suspicion, Stratton swaggered uneasily, Miss Denham trembled on the edge of confession, and Dr. Fielding, too cautious, perhaps concealed knowledge of those older wounds. Wimsey closed his notebook with a snap. Yes, he murmured, the crime is no child of the moment. It was conceived years ago, nourished by bitterness, brought to bloom now. We must see the whole garden, if we are to find the gardener who planted lavender in a dead man's study. And beyond the walls of Hawthorne Court, In the stillness of the night, the shadows of the past crept closer, whispering that the present crime was only the final act of an older, darker play. Whimsy lingered over the fragments of past scandals, letting them settle into place like stones in a wall. The locked room remained a puzzle. The handkerchief too convenient, the lavender too pointed, but he felt certain now that the truth lay not in method alone, but in motive woven across decades. If one could prise open a crack in the farce, aid of those most burdened by Sir Reginald's secrets, the method would reveal itself of its own accord. The trouble was, none would confess when confronted directly. Each knew too well the stakes. It called for something subtler, a trick of mind rather than of hand. That evening, as the household gathered in the drawing-room under Graves's watchful eye, Whimsy rose and addressed them all with a casual lightness that belied the weight of his intent. "My friends, I have been puzzling over Sir Reginald's last hour. The man had enemies, real or imagined. But he had also the instincts of a hound for disloyalty. He left us one clue, I think, a dying clue, and though it lies half-burned, I may yet recover its meaning." At this, Stratton started, though he quickly masked the movement by shifting in his chair. Eleanor turned pale, her fingers tightening on the armrest. Denham bent her head over her embroidery, though her needle did not move. Whimsy noted every flicker. "I have, in fact," Whimsy continued, "managed to reconstruct the destroyed letter through a method of chemical restoration. Faint traces of ink remain even on charred paper, and when treated with the right reagent, the words reappear." This was, strictly speaking, a fabrication. He had made no such attempt, nor did he possess the chemicals here. But the suggestion was enough. The silence grew taut as bowstring. "Tomorrow," he went on, "I shall compare the letter with Sir Reginald's records. It may show us who had most to fear from disclosure. Indeed, I think the murderer has already betrayed themselves in how they chose to burn it rather than leave it intact." There was a sharp sound. Porcelain striking wood. Stratton had set down his glass with unnecessary force, wine slopping over the edge. He muttered something about clumsiness, but his jaw was set too tightly, his smile too thin. Whimsy let the moment pass, content that the first stone had shifted. Later, in the quiet of the hall, Denham intercepted him, her face drawn. "Is it true, my lord? Can you really restore the words?" "Truth, Miss Denham," Whimsy said softly, "is often less chemical than psychological. But you see already how the mere suggestion loosens tongues." Her eyes flickered with desperation. "If you read it, if you know, then you will understand why Lady Eleanor cannot be guilty. Sir Reginald had the power to ruin her utterly. That letter concerned her past, not murder." She stopped, realizing she had said more than she intended. "And Captain Stratton?" Whimsy asked gently. "Did it speak of him as well?" But she pressed her lips together and fled, leaving him with confirmation enough both names had stood on that page. The following morning Whimsy set his unconventional plan fully in motion. He summoned each suspect separately to the study. Sir Reginald's domain, still heavy with his scent, his papers stacked, his chair empty. It was the perfect stage. On the desk, he placed a folded sheet of paper, its edges charred with candle flame to resemble the remains of the destroyed letter. Across it he had scrawled a meaningless jumble of phrases in fading ink, half concealed under blotting paper. When Stratton entered first, Whimsy leaned casually against the mantelpiece. "You see, Captain, the restoration worked better than I had hoped." Enough words survived to be legible. "I shan't trouble you with the details. No doubt you already know them." Stratton's eyes fixed on the paper, his posture stiffening. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Whimsy asked mildly, curious that Sir Reginald kept such thorough notes of past indiscretions. He seemed never to forget a wrong, however ancient. Yours, for example. Or should I say your family's? A flush crept up Stratton's neck. He tried to bluster. If you think I killed the man to silence a 20-year-old slander, you're mad. I wasn't even born when my father was dismissed. Ah, but you were alive when you gambled away your commission, were you not? The sins of the father compounded by the son, such a fine inheritance. Whimsy let the words hang, watching. Stratton's hands clenched into fists, his gaze never leaving the charred paper. Not once did he ask whether the reconstruction was genuine. His fear was not of exposure by trickery, but of exposure itself. When Eleanor followed, her reaction was different. She recoiled from the paper as though it might burn her anew. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not speak. Instead she whispered, "If you can read it, then you know what Sir Reginald held over me." Her voice broke. "I did not kill him, Lord Whimsy. But sometimes I almost wished I had the courage." Her confession, though not of guilt, gave Whimsy pause. The trap had sprung, but not yet caught its prey. Miss Denham, brought last, surprised him most. She glanced at the paper, then at Whimsy, and said in a voice firmer than before, "It is a trick, isn't it? There is nothing there. You only wish to see how we react." Whimsy smiled. "Then why tremble, Miss Denham? Because the truth will come out, trick or no trick. And when it does, none of us will be safe." The unconventional test had done its work. Stratton's violent defensiveness, Eleanor's broken plea, Denham's sudden courage. Each response revealed more than any formal interrogation could have. One of them had shifted closer to betrayal. That night, as Whimsy paced his chamber, he weighed what he had seen. Stratton, rattled by the phantom letter, showed the guilt of one who feared exposure rather than injustice. Eleanor's words rang true with despair, not cunning. Denham alone had pierced his ruse. Yet her tremor betrayed that she too bore knowledge too dangerous to speak. He poured himself a brandy, staring into the glass. Somewhere in these cracks lay the fracture that would split the facade wide open. He had forced them to reveal their hidden fears. Now he must see which of those fears had driven one to murder, and to weave lavender into the dead man's hand, as if the past itself had bloomed one final, poisonous flower. The charred scrap of paper still lay on Whimsy's desk the following morning, its false words half hidden beneath blotting paper. It had done its work admirably, luring forth reactions too raw to be rehearsed. But when he reached for it, intending to fold it away before anyone grew bold enough to examine it closely, his hand found only smooth wood. The desk was bare. He stood very still, surveying the study. Graves had locked the door after the last interrogation. The servants had strict instructions not to disturb anything. And yet, the scrap was gone. Whimsy's gaze drifted to the faint impression left in the dust of the blotter. Just the outline of a square, no more. Someone had stolen it during the night. He summoned Graves at once. The butler swore no one had entered the room save himself. The windows were latched, the doors locked. But Whimsy had long since ceased to trust in locks where determination lay. Someone in the house was not merely afraid of discovery. They were prepared to erase it. At luncheon, he watched the suspects with keener eyes. Stratton ate ravenously, as if to prove he had slept well. But his movements were jerky, his gaze flicking now and then to Whimsy as if gouging whether the trap still stood. Eleanor was wan, her appetite gone, her hands trembling whenever she raised her glass. Denham alone seemed composed, almost relieved. That composure was telling. Only one who knew the supposed evidence destroyed would permit themselves such calm. The theft unsettled the fragile balance of trust in the house. Whispers carried down the hallways, servants muttering about the ghost of Sir Reginald reaching for vengeance. Whimsy knew better. It was no ghost that prowled the corridors, but one of the living. Yet the notion of unseen hands stealing in the night tightened the atmosphere to breaking point. That evening, Whimsy contrived a quiet word with Denham in the library. Curious, isn't it? How a piece of paper no one was meant to see has vanished into thin air. Her eyes flickered, but she held his gaze. If it was nothing but a trick, then what does it matter? Whimsy murmured, but the thief could not know it was a trick. They believed it dangerous, or they would not have risked so much. Doesn't that tell us something? She pressed her lips together. It tells us that fear rules this house more than truth. And with that she turned away, leaving him with the echo of her words. The loss of the paper was more than an inconvenience, it was a declaration. The murderer was no longer content to sit in shadow. They were willing to act boldly to shape the investigation's course. By morning, another disturbance confirmed it. Graves reported that the lavender sprigs from Sir Reginald's hand, sealed in a small evidence envelope, had vanished as well. This time, there was no possibility of accident. The envelope had been in Graves's locked cabinet. The key had never left his pocket, yet the lavender was gone, spirited away with surgical precision. Whimsy gathered the household in the drawing room, his voice calm though his pulse beat hard. It seems Sir Reginald's murderer fears lavender more than the gallows. Twice now, evidence has been stolen under this very roof. I need not tell you what that means. Eleanor clutched at the back of a chair, her face stricken. You mean, they are among us still, even after all this? More than among us, Lady Eleanor, Whimsy said softly. They are listening, watching, shaping what we are allowed to know. And unless I move faster than they, the truth will vanish entirely. Stratton gave a sharp laugh, brittle and forced. Then perhaps you should admit defeat. My lord, if your evidence disappears like smoke, how will you ever prove anything? Whimsy regarded him coolly. Evidence is more than objects, Captain. It is also behavior. And someone's behavior is beginning to speak louder than all the lavender in Surrey. The room fell silent. The unspoken truth weighed on them. All the thief might strike again, and next time it might not be evidence they erased, but a person. That night Whimsy set a trap of his own. He placed a decoy, a sealed envelope identical to the one that had held the lavender, inside Graves's cabinet. Within it lay only a scrap of newspaper folded neatly. Graves alone knew of the trick sworn to secrecy. Then Whimsy waited. The hours dragged. Midnight passed. Then, just as the house settled into uneasy stillness, a floorboard creaked outside the study. Whimsy, hidden in shadow, held his breath. The door eased open. A figure slipped inside, silent but for the faint rasp of cloth against wood. They went directly to the cabinet, key already in hand. Whimsy caught only the outline of a tall form, the slope of shoulders tense with haste. The lock clicked, the cabinet opened, and the false envelope was whisked away. The thief never noticed the watcher in the dark. By dawn, the envelope was gone again, but this time Whimsy had seen enough. He knew who moved like that, who held themselves with that particular blend of desperation and discipline. The evidence had vanished, but in its theft, it had given him more than it could have ever proved on its own. The question now was not whether he could catch the thief, but how long they would wait before striking again. The game had shifted, and with it the stakes. The murderer was fighting not merely for concealment, but for survival. Whimsy poured himself a cup of coffee, his mind already turning to the next move. If trust was fragile before, It was shattered now. He could trust no one, not even, perhaps, those who claimed to stand with him. The lavender was gone, the scrap was gone, but the truth remained, smouldering like a fire that would not die. And whimsy, ever the hunter, meant to fan it into flame before the shadows smothered it forever. The house was restless that evening, a low wind rattling the shutters as if warning of imminent turbulence. Whimsy had barely settled into his chair in the library when a sharp, frantic cry pierced the corridors. He leapt to his feet, Graves close behind, and they raced toward the sound. In the morning room, a scene of chaos awaited. Miss Denham was collapsed onto the carpet, pale and trembling, her embroidery scattered around her like fallen leaves. The French windows stood wide open, the garden beyond shrouded in twilight gloom. And on the floor, unmistakable even in the dim light, lay the body of Captain Stratton. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the Persian rug, and a thin, cruel dagger protruded from his chest. Whimsy knelt beside the body, his eyes narrowing as he took in every detail, the angle of the blade, the disturbed soil by the windowsill, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air despite the evidence's earlier disappearance. "By God," Graves muttered, aghast. "He was killed in his own house, under our noses." "Yes," Whimsy murmured, and in a manner most deliberate. "Notice, Graves, the dagger was placed with precision, angled not to maim but to ensure death. A personal statement, yet careful, almost ritualistic. Someone wishes to remind us they are still in control." Denham shook violently beside him. I didn't hear anyone. I was upstairs.
I just came down. Oh, my lord, Miss Denham."
Whimsy said softly, laying a hand on her arm. "You did well to come. You are unharmed, and that is fortunate. But we must understand that the danger is far from over." The initial shock left the household trembling. Lady Eleanor, hastily summoned, entered in a state of near collapse, wringing her hands and gasping. "Another death? My God, what has happened?" Whimsy observed her closely. Her eyes were wide, corners glistening with tears, but he detected a strange steadiness in her breath, a subtle control she exerted over her reaction. He noted it, filing it away for later. "Who could have done this?" Graves demanded.
"The house is locked. We watched everyone."
Graves," Whimsy replied, rising, "you forget that the cleverest of criminals often operates in plain sight, using assumptions as their cloak. Locks and keys are only as effective as the mind that relies upon them. The murderer is bold indeed, and perhaps still among us." He approached the window. The garden beyond showed faint tracks in the soft earth. Boot prints, one set hurried and one cautious. "See here," he said, gesturing. "Someone entered or left through the garden, timing their move perfectly. They knew our routines. They know us well enough to anticipate both our actions and our errors." Lady Eleanor clutched her shawl. But why? Why now? Stratton was? He was only a threat in speculation. "Perhaps," Whimsy replied, "but threats are curious things. They grow and shift, depending on who perceives them. If the first theft was intended to mislead us, this act is intended to terrify. The stage has been reset. And yet, look at the details. The lavender remains. It is a calling card. A signature. The murderer wishes us to know the link to the earlier crime." Denham shivered. Then the one who killed Stratton. Could it be Lady Eleanor? Whimsy turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "You've heard nothing, Miss Denham, save what we have shared together, and yet you speak of her guilt. Why? Because the handkerchief, the lavender." Her voice trailed off. "Precisely," Whimsy said. "The very elements that seemed to incriminate Lady Eleanor were also, you see, the tools of misdirection. Someone used them to frame her, someone with access, knowledge, and a calm hand in chaos. Graves rubbed his forehead. Then who? Who else? Whimsy's eyes scanned the faces of the household, then drifted to the study doors, locked and untouched since last evening. "Do you recall the doctor?" he said finally. "He has been present at every juncture, calm, attentive, yet never revealing. He suggested heart failure. He observed the household, and he possesses both knowledge and authority within these walls. A convenient observer, who may be more than he seems." Lady Eleanor gasped. Dr. Fielding.
No, that cannot be.
"Yet consider," Whimsy pressed on. "He is the only person who moves freely in the house, who can access locked areas without suspicion. He knew of the charred letter, the lavender, the delicate intricacies of family history. Who else could orchestrate theft, observe reactions, and now strike with deadly precision?" Denham's fingers trembled around her embroidery. "But he is our doctor. He has cared for us all." "Care can mask intent," Whimsy said softly. "Fear can mask opportunity, and ambition or revenge, or long-held resentment, these are powerful motivators." Graves muttered. "If you're right, we are in danger now. He may strike again." "Indeed," Whimsy replied. "And the next act may not be subtle. The murderer has escalated, and I suspect they will not stop until they have silenced every obstacle, every witness, every inconvenient truth." He moved to the window once more, studying the garden, the faint traces of boots, the dark silhouette of hedgerows. "We must prepare, Graves. Locks and guards may slow the hand, but the mind moves faster than metal. Tonight we watch, we anticipate. The shadows are no longer subtle, they are active hunting." Lady Eleanor whispered, almost to herself, "And all this, and I am still accused." Whimsy's gaze softened. "Accusation is easier than investigation, my lady. But remember, true guilt leaves trails, subtle ones, in manner, in reaction, in fear. And that is what we shall follow. The house has changed. Stratton's blood is fresh, a warning. Whoever acts next believes themselves several steps ahead, but the step they have overlooked is mine. Outside." The wind picked up, rattling the glass and rustling the hedges. The murderer, whoever they were, moved unseen, yet the stage had been set for confrontation. Whimsy's mind raced, cataloguing every detail: the vanished paper, the stolen lavender, Denham's courage, Eleanor's poise, and now Stratton's violent end. The investigation had taken a sharp turn, and the balance of life and death in Hawthorne Court had never been more precarious. "Tonight," Whimsy murmured, "we see whether courage or cunning prevails. And the shadows, Graves? The shadows will speak." The house settled uneasily into silence, but Whimsy remained vigilant, certain that the next move would come. And when it did, it would demand every ounce of his intellect to prevent another life from being claimed. The morning light slanted through the tall windows of Hawthorne Court, illuminating the disarray left in Stratton's wake. Flowers on the windowsill were overturned, papers scattered like confetti, and the faint smell of lavender still lingered, almost mocking in its persistence. Whimsy stood in the study, observing the room with a calm intensity, letting the details settle into a coherent whole. Each previous incident, the handkerchief, the vanished paper, the stolen lavender, Stratton's death, was no longer a set of random events. They were brushstrokes forming a pattern, faint but unmistakable. He turned over the pages of a ledger, brushing aside older documents, until something trivial caught his eye, a faint smudge of dirt on the edge of a letter, almost imperceptible. He leaned closer, tracing the path of the soil. It matched the damp footprints outside the French windows where Stratton had been found. But the prints suggested a careful approach, deliberate rather than hurried. A murderer who killed impulsively left traces. This one left only the illusion of spontaneity. Whimsy's mind traced back through the events, the handkerchief placed to implicate Eleanor, the stolen evidence, Denham's trembling disclosure, the precision of Stratton's murder. Then it clicked. The person who orchestrated all of this was someone meticulous, capable of observing human behavior, and with access to intimate details of the household. The clues were not scattered randomly. They were deliberately staged to mislead, to manipulate perception. He recalled Eleanor's calm response to the recent chaos, Denham's courage in identifying the first trick, and Stratton's nervousness under the pretense of the reconstructed letter. Each reaction was a note in a complex symphony of deceit. But the one element that had been consistently overlooked, the small, habitual gesture of someone moving objects subtly to track reactions, had been in plain sight. Every time evidence disappeared, Whimsy realized it had been moved, never truly taken. The thief watched, studied, and returned what they deemed necessary, shaping the narrative. A sudden thought struck him. He strode to the mantelpiece and examined the clock. Its face was slightly smudged on one edge, fingerprints faint but distinct. It was subtle, easy to dismiss. But it repeated a pattern he had noticed in earlier movements, a hand that lingered over certain objects, always touching evidence without fully disturbing it, as if testing its weight in the mind of the observer. The murderer's signature was not in the crime itself, but in these tiny, habitual interactions. He called Graves to the room and pointed silently at the clock. "Observe this, Graves. A trivial smudge, you might think, yet it is consistent with all previous disturbances. Whoever is behind these acts is not careless. They are rehearsed, deliberate, and calculating." Graves frowned, but understanding slowly dawned. "So, you mean it's the same person?" Repeating the same little gestures. "Yes," Whimsy replied, eyes gleaming. "And notice the choices: lavender, charred paper. The placement of the handkerchief. Each designed to mislead, to draw attention away from their true pattern. They wish us to see one thing while hiding another. And it is in the hidden, repetitive habits, those subtle, easily overlooked movements, that the true signature resides." Whimsy walked deliberately to the sideboard, touching the silverware lightly as if assessing its arrangement. His mind pieced together the household interactions from the previous nights. Denham's swift avoidance of certain objects, Eleanor's instinctive reach toward her handkerchief when a topic arose, Stratton's glance at the ledger when the old letters were mentioned. These behaviors were not random. They were reactions to the murderer's manipulations, yet all bore traces of the same careful planning. Then he remembered the earliest clue he had almost dismissed. The positioning of the lavender sprig on Sir Reginald's desk. Not merely a calling card, he realized, but deliberately angled to suggest Eleanor's presence, to invite misinterpretation. And the handkerchief, embroidered with her initials, placed subtly nearby, had been too convenient. But that convenience was itself the illusion. The murderer had orchestrated everything from a vantage point of knowledge and control. Whimsy's gaze settled on the fireplace. The scorch marks from the burned letter had always struck him as ordinary until now. The pattern was emerging. The murderer used minor acts of misdirection to stage each scene, leaving enough of a trace to manipulate reactions, but never enough to betray themselves. And with each reaction, Denham's fear, Stratton's defensive posturing, Eleanor's quiet poise, the perpetrator refined their understanding of who could be trusted and who could not. He leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. The signature was clear obsessive precision, intimate knowledge of household routines, and an understanding of human psychology. This was not merely a crime of opportunity or passion. It was the act of someone trained in observation, someone who had lived among them long enough to know every reaction, every hesitation, every tell. It was then that a tiny, almost imperceptible detail drew his eye: the pattern of the embroidery on the cloth Denham had been working on. One thread, frayed slightly at the edge, matched the color of the lavender that had vanished twice. Not just coincidence. Someone had placed it there deliberately, to test response, to measure fear. A small, insignificant detail now made perfect sense. The murderer was patient, exacting, and deeply engaged in psychological games. Whimsy's lips curved slightly. The path to the killer, hidden all this time, lay not in grand gestures but in repetition, in minutiae, in the way they moved objects and watched reactions. And because the pattern had been laid bare, in plain sight all along, he now possessed the key to anticipate the next act. "Graves," he said, voice low and sharp, "we have overlooked the obvious in our eagerness to chase the dramatic. The signature is here, among us, in behavior and habit. The next move is predictable if we understand it. And I do." The inspector looked puzzled. Predictable. After 2 murders, missing evidence, and this house full of fear.
Yes,
Whimsy said, eyes glinting. Because the pattern is consistent. The murderer believes themselves invisible, but they are not. Every small act, every habitual gesture betrays them. And the very predictability of those gestures is what will bring them to justice. He moved toward the French windows, peering into the twilight garden. The wind stirred the hedgerows, carrying the faint scent of lavender once more, almost taunting in its persistence. Whimsy smiled faintly, a touch of triumph in his demeanor. The chaos of theft, the staged evidence, the second murder, they had all pointed to the same source, the same hand. The pattern had emerged from the shadows, subtle but undeniable. And as he stood there, watching the darkened paths of Hawthorne Court, he knew that the next encounter, when the murderer made their move again, would be the final revelation. Every misplaced object, every subtle action, every tiny behavioral signature had been recorded, analyzed, and understood. The invisible hand was no longer beyond his reach. It had left its trail in plain sight, waiting for the observer sharp enough to read it. Whimsy straightened. Turning back toward the house, the murderer had underestimated him, had counted on the chaos to mask their method. But the pattern was visible now, undeniable. When the hunt could proceed with precision, every detail, every small gesture, every whispered reaction had been catalogued. The house, silent but charged with tension, awaited the final act. And Whimsy, the patient observer, would ensure that when the next move came, it would end with truth unmistakably revealed. Whimsy spent the afternoon retracing every movement in Hawthorne Court, replaying reactions, gestures, and shifts in demeanor, as though the house itself were a stage, and each resident an actor unaware of their script. The patterns he had discerned earlier, the stolen evidence, the staged lavender, the careful placement of objects to provoke responses, formed a latticework in his mind. But he still needed the final piece. The hidden impulse behind the violence, the motive invisible to all but the most attentive observer. He called Lady Eleanor and Miss Denham into the library under the guise of needing assistance with estate documents. Both women entered cautiously. Eleanor still pale but composed, Denham with her usual quiet wariness. Whimsy's eyes swept over them, but his mind was elsewhere, returning again to the impressions left by Stratton and the vanished evidence. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice casual yet pointed, "we have considered greed, jealousy, even revenge as explanations for recent events. Yet I find the facts unsatisfying when interpreted in such a shallow fashion. Crime, particularly murder, is rarely born of surface motives alone. Eleanor's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she said nothing, waiting. Denham, too, leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight of what was to come. You may recall, Wimsey continued, that Captain Stratton, though reckless, was not a man without reason. And Lady Eleanor, though placed under suspicion, has displayed a remarkable steadiness. The first thefts, the vanished evidence, they were designed not merely to mislead, but to test reactions. Someone wished to observe, to manipulate. And only a mind both intimate with the household and obsessive in its attention could execute such a campaign. Denham's lips parted slightly, but she remained silent. Wimsey's gaze shifted to Eleanor. You see, my lady, we must look beyond the obvious. Consider the burned letter, the charred words, the constant recurrence of lavender. All these are symbols, and symbols, when chosen deliberately, reveal more than any confession. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly over the documents, betraying her anxiety despite her calm tone. You speak in riddles, Lord Wimsey. Surely you know my innocence. I do, he said softly. But innocence in this case is not self-evident, and the murderer relied upon that very presumption. Now, consider the first theft, the handkerchief placed under the cushion. Do you recall who handled it first? Eleanor and Denham exchanged glances. Denham began, then stopped. It was not I, Eleanor said firmly. Correct, Wimsey agreed. It was Captain Stratton. But observe, he did not steal it to keep, he did not destroy it to conceal. He acted, as did the thief who followed, to provoke a reaction. That is the key. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The murderer did not act for gain, nor for revenge, nor for passion. They acted to control, to assert dominion over others' perceptions. The motive is psychological obsession with influence, the compulsion to manipulate those around them, to orchestrate fear and uncertainty as a form of power. Denham's eyes widened, comprehension dawning. You mean, someone is killing not for money, not for inheritance, but because they cannot bear uncertainty. They must see how others react, how fear shapes decisions. Exactly, Wimsey said. The first murder, the theft of the handkerchief, the staged lavender, even Stratton's death. These are all instruments of the murderer's obsession. They measure responses, they calculate effects, they refine their approach. Each act reveals a layer of their own psyche, a need to dominate the minds of those around them. And it is this very compulsion that makes them dangerous. They act not from external pressure, but from an inner drive they cannot resist. Eleanor shivered, her composure wavering. And who could possess such meticulous knowledge, such access, and such obsession? Wimsey's eyes fixed on Dr. Fielding, who had been summoned under the pretext of examining Eleanor's pallor. The doctor's face was calm, professional, but Wimsey noted the subtle tension in his hands, the slight twitch at his jaw when Stratton's name had been mentioned earlier. The signs were minute, almost imperceptible. Yet consistent with the psychological profile, he had constructed intimate knowledge of the household, obsessive attention to detail, a need to manipulate and control. Dr. Fielding, Wimsey said gently but firmly, you have moved objects, stolen evidence, and orchestrated fear with precision. You acted not merely to conceal, but to observe and to shape the behavior of others. And when the opportunity presented itself, you struck to silence the one who might reveal truths you could not tolerate being exposed. The doctor's lips tightened, and his eyes flicked toward the door as if weighing escape, yet he remained seated. You have no proof, he said quietly, voice controlled. though the calm did not reach his eyes. Proof, Whimsy said, stepping closer, is not merely in objects or documents. It is in the pattern of behavior. The psychological signature, the repeated gestures that reveal compulsion. Your need to control, to test, to provoke, has left a trail in plain sight. And it is this trail that exposes the motive far more clearly than any ledger or letter ever could. Dr. Fielding's composure cracked for an instant. A micro-expression, fear, anger, perhaps panic, passing across his features before he masked it. Whimsy noted it with the meticulous care of an artist observing brushstrokes. The pattern was complete obsession, meticulous manipulation, and the escalating need to dominate. The murders were the outward expression of a mind consumed by control, a psyche that could not tolerate uncertainty or disobedience. You see, Dr. Fielding, Whimsy continued, his voice calm but firm, your obsession with the household, your careful orchestration of events, your subtle manipulations, all of these reveal a motive far more profound than greed or revenge. It is a need to assert dominion over minds, to shape reality according to your own design. And that is why you were willing to kill, why you were willing to erase evidence, and why you underestimated the observer who, at last, has discerned your pattern. Fielding's face drained of color. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the arms tightly, realizing that his careful game had been deciphered. You think you understand me," he said, voice low and trembling. "But you cannot know the entirety of what drives me. None of you can." "Perhaps," Whimsy replied, "but enough is revealed in your own actions. Your need to control has been your undoing. The pattern, the repeated gestures, the small manipulations, they speak louder than words. And now that they are understood, your influence collapses. There is no further room for your orchestrations." Eleanor rose slightly, her voice trembling yet clear. "Fen, we are safe. The danger, the fear, is it over?" Whimsy's gaze softened. "The immediate danger, yes. The understanding of the motive allows us to anticipate, to contain, to prevent further harm. What remains is to ensure that justice is administered and that the house is freed from the shadow cast by one mind's obsession." Denham exhaled, relief mingling with lingering tension. "I never imagined it could be psychological. That someone would go to such lengths, not for money, but for control." Whimsy inclined his head. "It is often the case, Miss Denham, that the most meticulous crimes are born of the deepest compulsions, and the most ordinary of facades conceal extraordinary obsessions." Dr. Fielding's motive, while shocking in its depth, explains the precision, the theatrics, and the danger. And now that it is known, we can move to prevent any further tragedies. The room fell silent, the weight of revelation settling over the occupants. Whimsy knew that the hidden motive, once unearthed, illuminated not only the crimes themselves but the path to resolution. The pattern, the obsession, the psychological compulsion, all now pointed clearly to the murderer's identity and the reason behind each calculated act. And outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender as a final, eerie reminder of the meticulous mind that had orchestrated so much fear. But inside Hawthorne Court, understanding had begun to dispel uncertainty, and the shadow of the hidden motive, finally exposed, allowed the first real hope of justice to emerge. Whimsy spent the remainder of the afternoon preparing the final confrontation with the meticulous care of a general setting a battlefield. Hawthorne Court, usually serene in its stately order, now bristled with tension. He had arranged the household in the drawing room under the pretense of a late tea. But each chair, each object, each angle of light had been chosen deliberately to provoke attention and observation. he knew that the murderer's mind, obsessed with control and subtle manipulation, would respond to the invisible cues embedded in the setting. By evening, the suspects had gathered, Eleanor pale but composed, Denham quietly watchful, and Dr. Fielding himself outwardly calm, though Wimsey could sense the taut muscles beneath his tailored coat. Graves stood discreetly by the door, ready to intervene if needed, yet instructed to remain unseen unless absolutely necessary. Wimsey addressed the room with his characteristic ease, his voice soft yet carrying a subtle authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, the events of the past week have been tragic, disconcerting, and complex. Yet patterns, however well hidden, always reveal themselves to the observant eye. I believe the mind behind these acts has grown bold, even careless, in assuming that all subtlety escapes detection." Fielding's hand twitched slightly, brushing against the back of his chair, and Wimsey noted it, as if the motion itself confirmed the theory he had long held. The detective's gaze lingered there just long enough to unsettle the doctor, then drifted casually toward the fireplace, the desk, and the windows, each corner a silent trap in its own right. "Consider, if you will," Wimsey continued, "the vanished letter, the stolen lavender, the tragic demise of Captain Stratton. Each act was performed with precision, yet all bear the unmistakable signature of a mind fixated on observation and control, a mind that believes itself invisible while manipulating fear in others." Fielding's lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing. He shifted slightly, as if preparing to rise. Wimsey did not flinch. And yet, even the most careful observer leaves traces, small habitual gestures, choices that betray intent, inconsistencies in timing and movement. It is in these details that the truth becomes apparent. There was a pause, heavy with anticipation. Eleanor's hands rested on her lap, tightly clenched, while Denham's eyes were fixed unwaveringly on Fielding. Graves, silent, exuded an air of readiness. "I have placed a decoy, Dr. Fielding," Wimsey said, finally meeting the doctor's gaze. "An envelope containing no evidence, yet one that I knew would tempt you. Your habitual manipulations, your need to control every reaction, compelled you to act. And now, having observed your movements, I can account for every step you have taken since the first act of theft." Fielding's composure faltered, just a fraction, his jaw tightening. "This is absurd. You cannot prove anything without the original evidence. You have only conjecture." Wimsey's smile was gentle but certain. "Conjecture perhaps, if one relies solely on objects. But behavior, Dr. Fielding, speaks louder than charred paper or a sprig of lavender. You have left a signature too subtle for the casual eye, but glaringly obvious to one trained in observation. The pattern of your actions, the escalation from theft to murder, the psychological manipulation of those around you, these are the pieces that complete the puzzle." The doctor's hand moved toward the door, almost imperceptibly, but Wimsey anticipated it. Graves stepped forward, blocking the exit with quiet authority, and Fielding froze, realizing the trap was complete. "Now," Wimsey said, stepping closer, "you may attempt another act of manipulation, another desperate move. But consider carefully, any sudden action will be observed, anticipated, and countered. You are no longer the one controlling the situation." Fielding's eyes darted to Eleanor, then Denham, seeking leverage, sympathy, perhaps an ally. There was none. Every subtle glance, every flicker of expression in the others confirmed the truth that Wimsey had long suspected. The house no longer belonged to him, or to fear, but to reason and observation. For a long moment the doctor said nothing, his body coiled like a spring, calculating options. Then, with a sharp exhale, he leaned back into his chair, surrendering not with words, but with the tension in his frame. You think you have understood me?" he muttered. But no one could fully grasp the mind that orchestrates events from the shadows. "Perhaps not fully," Whimsy replied softly, "but fully enough to prevent further tragedy. You acted out of obsession, not necessity, compulsion, not desperation. And that is why the pattern led us directly to you. Every gesture, every carefully timed act, revealed what you cannot conceal: a need to dominate the minds around you, even at the cost of life." Fielding's face drained of color, the faint tremor in his hands betraying his inner storm. "So, what happens now?" he asked, voice low, almost hollow. "You remain here?" "In the custody of the authorities," Whimsy said. "The pattern you left cannot be erased, and it will ensure that justice is done. The remaining members of this household are safe, because the mind that threatened them is no longer free to act." For a moment, silence reigned. The storm of fear that had gripped Hawthorne Court since Sir Reginald's death seemed to dissipate, leaving only the weight of resolution. Eleanor exhaled shakily, tears brimming in her eyes, and Denham's hand found hers, a small gesture of solidarity in the aftermath of terror. Whimsy, standing composed, allowed himself a brief moment to absorb the stillness. The meticulous chaos of stolen letters, vanished lavender, and deadly calculation had been unraveled not by force, nor by luck, but by patient observation, careful deduction, and an understanding of the human psyche. The hidden motive, once revealed, illuminated every act, every escalation, and every misdirection. Fielding, finally realizing the futility of further resistance, slumped slightly in his chair, his obsession now impotent. The trap had been perfect, the confrontation decisive. The murderer had no avenues left for escape or deception. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over Hawthorne Court, Whimsy allowed himself a quiet smile. The case was closed, the pattern discerned, and the hidden mind behind the chaos exposed. And though the house bore the scars of intrigue and violence, the balance of reason and justice had been restored. Graves approached, lowering his voice. "Well done, my lord. I had feared we might never see the end of it." "Indeed," Whimsy replied, turning toward the gathered household. But the end was always present in the smallest details, in the habitual gestures and subtle manipulations. We merely had to see the pattern emerge. Outside, the evening wind stirred the trees, whispering across the grounds as though carrying away the tension of the week. Inside, Hawthorne Court settled, finally free of fear, its dark secrets illuminated, and its inhabitants able to breathe in the clarity brought by patient observation and relentless deduction. The evening had descended into a rare calm, a deceptive lull that settled over Hawthorne Court like a fragile veil. The household, though weary from a week of tension, had begun to breathe again. Eleanor sat quietly in the drawing room, her hands folded in her lap, while Denham hovered nearby, fidgeting with the edge of a shawl. Whimsy, for the moment, allowed himself a rare pause, savoring the sense of closure that had seemed impossible only hours before. Yet something pricked at the back of his mind, a tiny unease that would not be silenced. The pattern had been laid bare, Fielding's obsession exposed, his manipulations deciphered. The murderer's motive, the sequence of thefts, the killings, all had aligned into a coherent narrative. And yet, the detective knew the human mind. Even the most meticulous plans left shadows, unseen corners where truth lingered beyond perception. It was Denham who noticed it first. A whisper of movement at the far end of the hallway, faint but deliberate. "My lord," she said softly, drawing Whimsy's attention. "I thought I saw someone near the study, but surely—" Whimsy's gaze sharpened. The study door had been locked since Fielding's apprehension. Only the authorized custodians had access. Yet a faint impression in the dust on the threshold, barely discernible in the flickering lamplight, indicated someone had crossed it recently. Graves, stationed nearby, stiffened. "Impossible," he muttered. "No one should be able to enter that room." Wimsey's mind raced, analyzing the possibilities. Fielding had been secured. Locks had been verified. The household had been accounted for. And yet, the dust betrayed movement. It was subtle, deliberate, and recent. A second mind had been active while attention focused elsewhere. He moved silently toward the study, the others following hesitantly behind. Each step revealed the same unsettling detail. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet the evidence of intrusion. The faint traces in the dust, a shifted paperweight, spoke of careful observation and subtlety. Whoever had entered had done so with precision equal to Fielding's, but with a motive entirely separate. Inside, Wimsey scanned the desk, the shelves, the papers. Everything seemed untouched. Yet a single piece of correspondence caught his eye. Tucked under the blotters, a letter addressed not to him, but to Lady Eleanor. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate, almost refined, with flourishes that suggested education and social standing. Wimsey carefully unfolded it. The contents were shocking. Fielding had not acted alone. Someone else had orchestrated parts of the chaos, manipulating him as much as he had manipulated the household. The letter hinted at threats, pressure, and carefully timed interventions that had influenced Fielding's actions. The real mastermind, it seemed, had remained hidden all along. A shadow behind the shadow, guiding the obsession and orchestrating the outcomes from a distance. Eleanor, her hand trembling, peered over his shoulder. Who could have done this? Who else knows enough to control Fielding? Wimsey's gaze swept the room, then returned to the letter. Someone who has remained unnoticed, someone whose presence we assumed innocuous. Fielding was but a pawn, albeit a dangerous one, and the evidence of his manipulation was cleverly disguised in plain sight, crafted to mislead us into believing he alone was responsible. Denham's eyes widened. Someone in the house? Someone which should it be? Someone we trusted? Yes, Wimsey murmured, the pieces of the final puzzle beginning to align. And I suspect the clues have been there all along, in gestures we dismissed, in reactions too subtle to register consciously. The final twist is not merely a question of action, but of intent hidden behind layers of observation. He motioned for Eleanor and Denham to follow him into the hallway. Each step toward the hidden truth tightened the tension. Wimsey's mind catalogued every previous interaction, every smile, every hesitation, every carefully framed comment. Then it struck him the minor inconsistencies, the seemingly trivial interjections that had seemed inconsequential during the investigation, all pointed to one person. A series of small, deliberate interventions had guided Fielding's obsession and misdirected the household's suspicion. The realization came with a shock of clarity. Lady Eleanor herself had been subtly steering the chain of events, exploiting Fielding's compulsions while maintaining the guise of victimhood. Each stage, the handkerchief, the stolen lavender, the charred letter, had been designed to provoke specific reactions, to measure fear, and to orchestrate outcomes beneficial to her long-hidden agenda. The psychological manipulation had gone far deeper than anyone had suspected. Wimsey turned slowly to face her. "Lady Eleanor," he said softly, but with iron authority, "it seems the final revelation is yours alone to bear. The letters, the evidence, the orchestrations, they point not merely to Fielding's obsession, but to your guidance of it. You controlled the chaos, shaping every act from the shadows." Eleanor's composure faltered for the first time. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair tightly, knuckles white. You misunderstand, my lord," she stammered, voice trembling. "I did not. Those deaths I never meant." "Intent," Whimsy said quietly, "and the evidence of influence are two separate things. You did not act with a dagger in your hand, yet the pattern of control is unmistakable. Every subtle intervention, every calculated suggestion, every reaction you measured, reveals the true scope of your orchestration." Denham's face went pale. All this, and we thought Fielding was the mastermind. He was merely the instrument.
"Yes,"
Whimsy said, eyes calm and precise. "And now the final act of this intricate design must be addressed. The mastermind cannot remain free, not when their subtle influence has caused death and terror. The pattern has led us here, to the origin of the manipulation itself." Eleanor's hands shook violently. You cannot prove it," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the truth. Whimsy stepped closer, voice measured, deliberate. "Proof is not only in documents or letters. It is in observation, the habitual control of behavior, the orchestration of responses, the escalation of fear and reaction. You underestimated the mind capable of perceiving such subtlety. Your genius in concealment was precise, yet predictable. And predictability, my lady, is its own undoing." Fielding, seated in the corner, looked up, eyes wide with dawning comprehension. The person he had believed controlled the investigation, the household, even the detective, was in fact the hidden architect. His own obsession, his own murderous escalation, had been a response to guidance he barely realized he had received. Eleanor's face paled further, realizing that the house, which she had believed compliant and pliant under her manipulation, now viewed her with eyes that dissected every motion, every nuance, and every trace of intent. Whimsy had understood not just the pattern, but the mind behind the puppet strings. Graves, standing silently behind the group, finally stepped forward. "My lord, what shall we do?" Whimsy's gaze remained steady on Eleanor. "We allow justice to follow the path revealed by observation and reason. The mastermind, having concealed themselves in the shadows, can no longer escape the consequences of orchestrating events so meticulously. The case, which seemed resolved, has delivered its last twist, and it is up to law and careful procedure to ensure it reaches its proper conclusion." Eleanor's lips parted, as if to protest, but she found no words. The trap was complete, not one of violence or force, but of insight, logic, and patient deduction. The final revelation had exposed the unseen hand behind the chaos, the mind that had manipulated obsession, and the subtlety that had eluded all until now. Whimsy's eyes softened only slightly as he turned toward the room, toward Denham, Graves, and even Fielding. The last-minute twist had tested his understanding, challenged his observation, and demanded every measure of his intellect. Yet the truth now stood clear. Hawthorne Court, though scarred by fear and death, could finally breathe, the hidden manipulations laid bare, and the final act of justice ready to unfold. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees once more, carrying a faint trace of lavender, a reminder of the carefully constructed chaos. But inside, reason had prevailed, the unseen pattern revealed, and the mastermind's subtle dominion irrevocably broken. The morning sun fell pale and diffused through the tall windows of Hawthorne Court, casting long shadows across the drawing room where the household had gathered in uneasy silence. Eleanor remained seated, her composure frayed yet still carefully maintained, while Denham hovered near the doorway, her eyes darting from the fireplace to the far corners of the room. Whimsy stood at the center, calm, collected, a silent fulcrum around which the truth had finally begun to pivot. Graves lingered behind him, an ever-watchful sentinel, knowing that the final moments would require both patience and precision. Whimsy began slowly, his voice measured, deliberately drawing out the tension. The events of the past week have unfolded like a complex dance, each movement choreographed to mislead, to provoke, and to manipulate. At first glance it seemed we were dealing with one mind, that of Dr. Fielding, whose obsession with control and subtlety led to deadly consequences. Yet, as we have learned, the true mind behind the orchestration remained hidden, guiding, shaping, and testing every reaction. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The household felt the tension like a tangible presence, as if the very air in the room had thickened with anticipation. "Lady Eleanor," he continued, turning toward her, "you underestimated the capacity of observation, the meticulousness of deduction, and the persistence of human insight. Every gesture, every carefully placed object, every seemingly trivial remark bore the imprint of a controlling influence. But you believed your guidance invisible." Eleanor's face paled further, her fingers clutching the edge of the chair. You think I orchestrated it all?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Whimsy said, voice calm, almost gentle, "though not every act required your hand directly. You shaped Fielding's obsession, guided his compulsions, and allowed him to become the instrument through which chaos would unfold. Your manipulation was subtle, insidious, and nearly perfect, but no plan, however clever, escapes observation entirely." Graves stepped closer, his presence imposing. "Then she should be taken into custody immediately," he said. His tone firm. Whimsy raised a hand. "Not yet. Observe if you will. The final nuance." He gestured to the far corner of the room, where a small table held the envelope containing the letter that had revealed Eleanor's hidden influence. "Notice this placement. Deliberate, yes, yet intended not only to inform but to provoke a test. We are seeing the final stage of her own game. She wishes to gauge our comprehension before we act, to measure fear, to assess control." Eleanor's lips parted, eyes darting between Whimsy and the envelope. There was a glimmer of calculation in her gaze, the faintest trace of composure returning. "And if I am wrong?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. "You are not wrong," Whimsy replied. "But your cleverness does not grant immunity. The evidence, though subtle, is sufficient to reveal both method and intent. The behavioral signature, the orchestration of events, and the manipulation of Dr. Fielding all point to your guiding influence. Justice will follow, whether immediate or delayed, for the pattern is clear." A quiet tension fell, broken only by the distant ticking of the mantel clock. Then, without warning, Eleanor rose swiftly, moving with an unexpected agility that startled even Whimsy. She seized the letter, crumpled it in her hand, and darted toward the French windows. The swift, practiced movement confirmed the cunning that Whimsy had long suspected. A mind capable of rapid adaptation, precise observation, and calculated risk. Graves lunged, but Whimsy held him back with a calm gesture. "Observe," he murmured. "The final act of a mastermind is often a test, not just of others, but of themselves. Notice the subtleties in timing, the reliance on distraction, the use of the familiar to obscure intention. She believes she can vanish, and perhaps she can, but her choices reveal far more than the mere act of flight." The household erupted into minor chaos. Denham's gasp, the shifting of chairs, the distant clatter from the hallway, all were muted cues to the detective, catalogued, analyzed, and understood. Whimsy did not chase. He watched. In her flight, Eleanor's careful attention to placement, her reliance on habitual paths through the house, left a trail invisible to all but him. Then the envelope she had seized fell from her grasp, sliding across the polished floor. It revealed not only the letter but an additional scrap, an overlooked note from Fielding, detailing his own manipulations, his fear, his reliance on Eleanor's subtle pressures. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the confirmation that while Fielding acted, Eleanor had been the shadow behind every move. Wimsey stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "You see, my lady, the brilliance of a plan lies not only in execution but in predictability. Even as you attempt to escape, the pattern of your movements, the habitual choices you make, betray the mind behind them. You may flee, but the trail remains, and the observation, patient and deliberate, ensures that justice need only follow the steps already left in its wake." Eleanor paused at the threshold of the window, glancing back, eyes sharp and calculating. For a brief instant, it seemed she might leap into freedom, but Wimsey's calm, unflinching gaze held her. "You cannot escape," he said quietly, yet each word carried the weight of certainty. "Every act has been observed, every habit recorded. The pattern is clear. The endgame is already in motion, whether by your hand or by circumstance." Her composure cracked. The slightest quiver betrayed the realization that her dominion over the household, over Fielding, and over the chain of events had ended. She dropped the letter entirely, allowing it to slide to the floor. Wimsey's eyes followed it, then returned to hers. "Justice," he said, "is not always swift, and it is not always immediate. But when the mind acts with deliberation, when patterns emerge from chaos, and when human observation is precise, it arrives inevitably. You attempted to hide behind another's obsession, to manipulate fear and control, but the meticulous eye has traced every thread. There is no escape from reason." Graves moved then, stepping forward to place firm hands on Eleanor's arms. Guiding her back from the threshold, she offered no resistance, though her expression remained defiant. Denham exhaled, relief mingling with lingering apprehension as the final act of control was wrested from the mastermind. Wimsey bent slightly to retrieve the fallen letter, examining it with his practiced eye. Every note, every signature of manipulation had been accounted for. The last-minute twist, the hidden influence, the unseen hand guiding Fielding, all were revealed, now documented, now understood. The case, intricate and deadly, had reached its conclusion. Yet even as Eleanor was led away, Wimsey allowed a faint thought of caution. The human mind, clever and unpredictable, could always surprise, and the shadows of Hawthorne Court would forever hold the memory of subtle dominion and dangerous obsession. But for now, the pattern was complete. The hidden motive exposed, and the final act of justice, whether through immediate consequence or eventual accountability, was secured. He turned to Graves and Denham, his calm presence a stabilizing force amid the lingering tension. "Observe closely," he said softly. "The clues we overlooked, the small gestures dismissed as inconsequential, were in fact the keys. Attention to detail, the patience to perceive the patterns in behavior, and the understanding of human psychology. These are what bring hidden minds into the light. And it is this that ensures that even when chaos seems complete, reason and observation remain steps ahead of every deception." Outside, the wind stirred the trees around Hawthorne Court, scattering the last traces of lavender, carrying with it the quiet reminder that even when villains act with meticulous planning, the patient observer sees all, traces every step, and ensures that justice, though sometimes delayed, cannot be permanently escaped. The night had settled over Hawthorne Court, casting long, flickering shadows across the estate as Wimsey stepped into the cool evening air. The house behind him was quiet now, its secrets laid bare, its manipulations exposed, and its immediate dangers neutralized. Eleanor had been escorted to the authorities, Fielding secured, and the household left to breathe freely for the first time in days. Yet, as he walked along the gravel path, the detective's mind was restless, circling over details that refused to settle, threads that seemed unresolved. The faint trace of lavender still lingered in the air, a delicate reminder of the chaos it had symbolized, but it also seemed oddly out of place now. Whimsy's gaze drifted to the rose bushes along the boundary, and there, nearly hidden beneath the foliage, he noticed a small scrap of paper, curled and partially hidden in the shadows. It was not the first clue, nor the most obvious, but something about its presence struck him immediately. Its deliberate placement suggested intent, a message meant to be found yet obscure enough to elude casual notice. He bent down, carefully picking it up. The paper was folded with precision, and the ink, though slightly faded, was readable. A simple line was scrawled in a handwriting distinct from any he had catalogued during the investigation. Not all truths are seen at once. Observe carefully. The game continues. Whimsy's eyebrows lifted slightly, a deliberate warning, or perhaps a challenge. Someone else had been aware, or at least interested, in the unfolding events. A mind watching from afar, intrigued by the intricacies of manipulation, control, and observation. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the tone deliberately cryptic. It implied that, although Fielding and Eleanor had acted, they were not the only players who had mattered, and perhaps were not the last. The detective's mind began to reconstruct the sequence of the last weeks, revisiting overlooked interactions, minute gestures, and small contradictions in witness statements. Each event, each carefully orchestrated manipulation, now seemed layered with a complexity that hinted at an unseen audience. Even the meticulous orchestration by Eleanor had been conducted with awareness, as if someone had observed her work, measuring the effects and perhaps anticipating further moves. A sense of unease settled over Whimsy, but it was tempered by a familiar thrill, the exhilaration of discovery, of puzzles whose edges were sharp and whose solutions required both patience and insight. The case of Hawthorne Court, he realized, was complete in one sense. The crimes had been unraveled, the psychological motives exposed, justice rendered. Yet the final message hinted that the story was not over, that shadows remained just beyond perception, waiting to test his skills again. He pocketed the note carefully, observing the way the moonlight glinted across its surface, and continued along the gravel path, stepping past the wrought iron gates and into the quiet of the night. The estate behind him was calm, its corridors silent, its mysteries for now confined to memory and the lessons of observation. Yet in every quiet corner, in every shadow that flickered under the moonlight, Whimsy's mind traced possibilities, calculated probabilities, and catalogued patterns, as if the invisible audience suggested by the note might already be watching. As he walked toward his car, the detective's thoughts returned to the minor inconsistencies he had noticed over the course of the investigation. The subtle tension in Fielding's movements when Eleanor spoke, the minute variations in the placement of letters and documents, even the faint scent of lavender that had sometimes seemed misplaced. Each anomaly, previously contextualized by the immediate chaos, now suggested layers beyond comprehension. Perhaps another observer had been testing not just Fielding, but the household itself, anticipating human reactions to uncertainty and fear. The gravel crunched softly under his shoes as he approached the edge of the estate. Whimsy paused, glancing back at the dark silhouette of Hawthorne Court against the horizon. The windows glimmered faintly in the moonlight, reflecting the last vestiges of the night's tension. He felt, for the first time that evening, the familiar certainty that though the immediate danger had passed, The world contained infinite complexities, each capable of challenging perception, intuition, and deductive reasoning. He placed the scrap of paper carefully in his coat pocket, next to his notes on the investigation. It was a reminder that no case was ever truly finished, that human behavior, motivation, and obsession were infinitely layered, and that even the most meticulous unraveling could leave fragments untouched, shadows unexamined. The note was both a warning and a promise someone else, somewhere, had been aware, had been engaged with the unfolding narrative, and might yet intervene. Whimsy's expression remained calm, but the sharpness in his eyes hinted at his readiness. He was accustomed to such lingering questions, the unfinished threads that teased the edges of reason. The letter, the faint trace of lavender, the subtle manipulations of Eleanor and Fielding, all were now part of a larger landscape of human psychology, patterns of behavior and hidden influence that required continual vigilance. As he reached his car, the detective allowed himself a final, lingering glance at the house. There was satisfaction, yes. The case had been largely resolved, justice delivered. The mastermind exposed, but the air of unfinished business remained. In his mind, he traced the faint outline of new possibilities, new actors who might have been observing, calculating, and preparing for the next move. The engine started quietly, and Whimsy drove down the winding road away from Hawthorne Court, the night stretching ahead in serene darkness. Yet the mind of a detective never rests completely. Questions persisted, details lingered, and the thrill of discovery remained alive in every shadow. The final message, cryptic yet deliberate, reminded him that the world of human intrigue was endless. Patterns would emerge, motives would be hidden, and mysteries would always beckon. Even as the estate faded behind him, Whimsy's thoughts circled endlessly, probing each nuance of behavior, weighing each subtle clue. Hawthorne Court had yielded its immediate secrets, but the note in his pocket ensured that the detective knew no mystery truly ends. Somewhere, someone watched, and somewhere a new puzzle awaited the keen eye, the patient mind, and the inexhaustible intellect that had guided him through this intricate web of obsession, manipulation, and murder. And with that thought, he allowed himself a faint smile, the quiet knowledge that the game of observation and deduction would never truly conclude, only evolve, each ending a prelude, each resolution a whisper of another mystery yet to unfold.